Matisse Snyder. Chapter 22. Coming of Age.
Derek Riggs, Upstate Massachusetts, 2002. On my first day of high school, I walked uncomfortably down the halls, eyeballing everyone and speaking to no one. I clutched my backpack strapped tightly, reminding myself of the retractable blade I'd stitched into one of its pockets, since I was only able to remain calm if I had a weapon in reach. But on that particular day, I was more unsettled and worried than I had been in years, and the knife I kept in my bag did little for my state of mind. Because for the first time since Sebastian and I had been pulled apart and sent to different schools when we were younger, we were now going to be put back together. The only problem was that Sebastian hadn't showed up at the place where we had agreed to meet that morning. He hadn't even called or emailed to adjust when or where that was supposed to be. And as I stood at my assigned locker, combing the crowds for any sign of him, I remembered that the last time we were supposed to gather supplies for the fort, he had been late. That the last time we were supposed to run drills, he had canceled. And despite his constant assurances of commitment to our group and its protocols, in that moment, it dawned on me how many excuses he had recently given and how many easy way outs he had taken. He and I needed to have a talk. But most of all, we needed to have the meeting that he had scheduled for earlier that day. Because while I remained confident that I could kill anyone around me, the fact that I was unfamiliar with the terrain or how to escape in the event of the infection made me feel as claustrophobic and frantic as an animal backed into a corner.
"Derek!"
Sebastian shouted from down the hall, spotting him waving me towards him, and relaxed a little bit, able to at least stop imagining that something terrible had happened to him. I pushed my back off the locker I'd been leaning against and walked quickly in his direction. But as I came to stand by his side, intending to get an answer for why he hadn't shown up earlier, I noticed that someone else was with him. Another kid our age stared curiously at me and nodded hello despite my disconcerting frown. "Who's he?" I asked, referring to the mystery kid at Sebastian's side.
"Derek, this is my friend Gary. Gary, this is Derek," Sebastian explained, gesturing back and forth between us. "What's up?" Gary explained, modeling Sebastian's cool guy demeanor. I ignored his question and turned my attention back to getting an explanation out of Sebastian. "Where were you?" "Huh?" Sebastian replied, his mouth drooping open for a second after he spoke. Then, as he combed his mind to try and figure out what I was referring to, he let out a gasp. And as I watched his expression change, I realized that he had forgotten about our meeting and had only just now remembered it. I was not happy, to say the least. "Oh, shit," he stated, smacking his hand on the back of his neck and releasing a laugh. I'm sorry, dude. I totally forgot. Shit. Yeah, well, we still need to, I started to say, stopping as I remembered that Gary was listening in. And since the last thing I wanted to do was speak candidly about the fort or the established protocols of our survival plan, I needed to devise a code so that Gary wouldn't figure out what was actually being said. I adjusted my bag in my hand, lowered the tone of my voice, and stared intensely at Sebastian, hoping he'd understand what I was about to say. "What I mean is, you know how I don't like eating cold cookies, and that I only like them when they're warm? Well, my mom's bringing them out of the oven right now, so we have to go if we're going to make it back before school starts," I explained, watching a flutter of recognition in Sebastian's expression. He nodded and took a deep breath, thinking of how to respond
in the code I'd used. Yeah, right, he sighed, squinting with uncertainty. I don't think we have time before class starts. I mean, I only like warm cookies too, but I'll eat them cold if I have to, he replied, surprising the shit out of me. Not only had he missed our designating meeting time, but now he was making excuses for it. I took an aggravated step towards him and scowled. Since when in the fuck will you eat cold cookies? Dude, it's not like that. I'm just saying it's the first day of school and I don't want to miss what? Something more important than warm cookies? I shouted, appalled by Sebastian's conduct. Gary remained by his friend's side, bewildered by the argument that we were having, and raising his voice to interject. Guys, my mom packed me some cookies for lunch, like, if you want, you could just have those and microwave them or something, Gary suggested, trying to be amicable about something that he didn't even understand. I turned angrily towards him and pointed a finger at his throat. Shut the fuck up, Gary. Nobody gives a shit about your cookies. Whoa, Sebastian interrupted, taking a step to the side to stand between Gary and me. Look, Gary, we're not actually talking about cookies. Thanks for your offer, but can you just give us a second alone, please? Yeah, sure, Gary stated, giving me an unimpressed parting glance as he turned to walk down the hall. Where'd you find that douchebag? That douchebag is my friend, Derek, so try not to tell him to shut the fuck up until you know him a little better, okay? I have more important things to worry about than his feelings, and so do you, in case you forgot that too. Dude, just calm down for a second, Sebastian exclaimed, as the bell for the first class sounded and the hall full of kids started to flow into classrooms. I am sorry I forgot the meeting, all right? We can do it after school and sweep the premises then, okay? Are you joking? I gasped, disgusted by the impracticality of his suggestion. You want us to occupy uncharted territory for 6 full hours? And then what? Just pray that if the infection happens, we'll get lucky and escape? Oh, for fuck's sakes, dude. It's not uncharted territory, Sebastian groaned, pressing his fingertips on the sides of his temples. We've played sports in the school fields here. We've been to events in the gymnasium, and we've even screwed around in the halls when my parents used to volunteer on election days. Yeah, like 3 fucking years ago. Jesus Christ, Sebastian. Now you're telling me we're supposed to operate according to outdated intel too? We're not operating. We're going to school. And it's not intel. There are childhood memories, he yelled, breaking his calm demeanor. Jesus Christ yourself, Derek. You can't even just stop and compromise for 1 second to see how ridiculous this is, can you? We will do a sweep of the premises after school. What in the hell's the matter with you? I stated, no longer just angry. I was hurt. How can you do this? Do what? Turn your back on the protocols, on everything that we've worked so hard on for so long. I told you I'm not, Sebastian protested, annoyed by the fact that I was calling him on his cowardice. Bullshit, I snapped, unable to keep the anger I felt from boiling to the surface. I shook my head in disbelief and pointed a stern finger at Sebastian. If you want out, it's your own fucking funeral. Don't think that you can just come crawling back when the infection happens, I finished, turning my back on him and walking down the hall. Hank, he exclaimed, following behind me. It's the first day of school, goddammit. I'm not going to get myself blackballed again just because you can't wait until later. We're not in elementary anymore, Derek. What we do matters now, he finished, grabbing a hold of my arm and turning me towards him. I pushed his hand off me and took a step back to distance myself from him. Don't you tell me what matters, I snarled, noticing Sebastian's defensive posturing start to interfere with his nonchalant demeanor. He was growing upset and fast.
I'm not gonna waste my time arguing with a pussy about why he's turned into a pussy. What I need to worry about is if this kind of bullshit runs in your family, I screamed, referring to whether or not I'd still be able to trust Sebastian's brother, Matthew. However, as the words left my mouth and the idea dawned on me that I could lose both my friends and everything I cared for, I noticed how utterly furious what I just said had made Sebastian. His eyes flared open and his fists clenched. Then, as he made his move in my direction, I let my backpack fall to the ground and raised my hands up to guard my jaw. Sebastian and I had practiced fighting for as long as we'd gotten along, but that had only been the case because we needed to prepare for the oncoming infection. And when it came to fighting each other for real, the only time I could remember squaring off against him was for a fleeting moment years earlier in the forest. But now, his long arms swung furiously past my head as I ducked and weaved in between them. Sebastian had always been bigger and stronger than me, and I had always been smaller and faster than him. But when one of his right hooks landed hard against the side of my head, only to be followed again and again, I stopped thinking with any degree of rationality, unable to treat this fight as if it was anything like the ones we'd had before. Now, I was out for blood. I exploded forward and thrust my forehead into Sebastian's nose, feeling a splatter of blood spray across my face. Sebastian recoiled for a moment, stunned that I had gotten through, only to look up furiously and come even harder than before. He grabbed hold of my shirt and pulled me towards him, locking my head in a chokehold as he repeatedly banged me against a locker. I tried to pull free, squirming and wriggling as best I could, but he was too furious and too strong. So after being rammed into the locker a few more times, I let my weight sink me down just enough to punch his knee and buckle his balance. We both came crashing to the ground, and a moment's grapple saw me wind up on top of him. But before he could flip himself over or push me off, I was able to wrap my arm around him, clinging tightly to his back like a baby chimp. I pushed my forearm around his throat to try and choke him unconscious despite his attempts to get me off, but once I locked him into that position, we both knew that he only had a matter of seconds to either get me off him or lose the fight. And while at the time I had assumed I'd won, to my surprise, Sebastian was strong enough not only to stand up with me clinging to him, but to quickly take the few steps between where we were fighting to a nearby water fountain. Then, with the last remaining breath of oxygen that had made its way to his brain, he jumped as high as he could and turned his back towards the fountain, smashing my head on the nozzle and causing me to lose my grip. Blood gushed out of the fresh wound on the side of my head, and Sebastian pushed himself along the ground to try and get away from me, gasping for air while clutching his broken and bloodied nose. I lay motionless on the ground, twitching my head to the side to try and keep the blood from pooling on my face. Then, after catching my breath, I sat up to lean against the row of lockers opposite the ones that Sebastian was resting on. Our eyes met and then drifted back to the linoleum floor where smears of blood covered nearly every inch between the two of us. The scene looked more reminiscent of someone slaughtering a pig than two friends having a fight. Sebastian had managed to catch his breath again, and I had come to the conclusion that while I was going to have a new scar on my head, it didn't feel like there would be any permanent damage or concussion to have to deal with. And despite both of our best efforts to seriously injure one another, fortunately, all we'd managed to do was inflict flesh wounds. I looked back up at Sebastian after observing the carnage of the scene to see him doing the same thing. A smile spread across his face, and I nodded, understanding his thought process without saying a word, releasing a chuckle myself. Good move, I stated, referring to the acrobatic leap into the air that had knocked me off him. Thanks. I think you broke my nose again, he exclaimed, delicately pinching one of his nostrils for a moment to try and slow the bleeding. Yeah, well, at least you don't need stitches, I replied, touching the thick flap of skin that dangled off the gash of my head. You want to come to the school nurse, then? He asked, pushing himself off the ground with one hand while keeping the other against the lockers behind him for support. Fuck that. I can use the practice. I'll probably just head over to the fort, I said, trying to look on the bright side of what had happened. Seriously? Sebastian groaned, losing his positive disposition once more. The last time you stitched yourself up, it got infected. Yeah, and I learned a valuable lesson for this time, I stated, rising to my feet. You were hospitalized too, remember? Yeah, well, there aren't going to be any hospitals after the infection hits, so why bother getting used to them? I asked, unable to appreciate Sebastian's pampered view of medical care. He didn't respond at first, and instead gave me a blank stare of indignation. Derek, seriously, let's just go to the nurse, he suggested again, trying to pass my words off as if I didn't really mean them. But I did, and I resented his contradiction. I shook my head in response, and Sebastian let out an exasperated sigh as he turned to look down the empty hall. And as I watched the frustration build on his expression, I realized our fight wasn't over. This was bigger than just missing a meeting or screwing up on one of the protocols. Sebastian was different, and we were growing apart. Just say it, I exclaimed, finally accepting the reality of the situation. Say what? That you want out. I told you, I don't want out. I just want to... Fuck, it's not one or the other, okay? I mean, we have to be able to compromise about some of this stuff, or we're going to end up prepared for the infection and completely unprepared for everything else. Just say it, I repeated. No. Then I'll say it for you. Fuck you, Derek, Sebastian exclaimed, refusing to let go even though I knew he wanted to. That's not your decision to make. You're right. I've already made my decision. It's up to Matthew now, I said, removing my cell phone from my pocket. Go to the nurse, and then meet us at the fort, I instructed, scrolling through my contacts for Matthew's number. Sebastian took an infuriated step towards me, and I slowly tilted my head up to look him in the eye, knowing that he was thinking about the same law of our protocols that I was. The fail-safe contingency that we had come up with so that if anyone ever tried to leave the group, the two who remained faithful would get to decide their fate. And exactly what makes you think that we won't just decide to kick you out? He snapped, foolishly believing that his brother would only think along the lines of family. I don't know what he'll do, I admitted, hitting the call button on my phone as I raised it to my ear. All I know is that after today, either you're gonna come to your senses or one of us is gonna die.